Teammates are like oxygen.
Beautiful.
They can pump you up
Yeah!
or calm you down. Teammates stand proud with you, so you can finally exhale. And the best teammates never let you forget to breathe.
For more than 60 years, Symetra Life Insurance Company has helped people breathe a little easier. With retirement, benefits, and life insurance products, Symetra is your teammate for whatever lies ahead.
For over 55 years, Allegro Pediatrics has partnered with families to heal, nurture, and empower children in their journey to adulthood. We offer care at 8 Eastside locations, availability 365 days a year, and convenient online scheduling. Allegro Pediatrics, where healthier futures begin.
For every kid that didn't have a chance, and every kid that was out of options, Seattle Children's is fighting for you. Because this isn't about beating the odds. It's about changing them for all kidkind.
Hello, my name is Laura Kastner, and I'm happy to join Parent Ed Talks as your series moderator. I am a clinical professor in the Department of Psychology and the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at University of Washington. I'm the author of scientific articles and 5 books on parenting. And I have a clinical practice in which I see children and couples and families. For this season's Parent Ed Talk series, Parent Math has put together a pool of some of the best parenting media in the country: Chicago Parent, Metro Parent, Staten Island Parent, and New York Family. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us for today's Parent Ed Talks event entitled Brave Listening: The Secret to Safeguarding Your Child's Mental Health with Stacey Freedenthal. So first, what we'd like to do is welcome all of you, as I said, and then we'll be kicking off our learning with her. But first, I want to say to all the media partners that we are happy to have you here. It's our collective passion and purpose to build inclusive, safe, educated, and loving communities for our families. We are dedicated to the mission of serving and being a resource to families, and we never settle for the status quo. Before we start our presentation, please take a moment to let us know what city you're joining us from and put your answers into the Zoom chat at the bottom of your screen. We always like to see where people are coming from. New York City, welcome. Seattle, Kenmore, Santa Clara, Sammamish. This is always so much fun. Rome, welcome to Rome. New York City, more Seattle. New York City, Detroit, Portland, Silver. This is so much fun. We could go on and on. Welcome to all of you. Stacey Freedenthal is a psychotherapist, an educator, a writer, a consultant, and a professor, a speaker who specializes in suicide prevention. So please welcome me in joining her for her presentation for about a half an hour, and then we'll go to Q&A. So thank you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for that introduction. And can folks hear me okay? Well, if not, I'll rely on someone to, okay, thank you. I see in the chat that people can hear me. So I know somebody who did a whole hour-long presentation into the void, and the whole time the Zoom was disconnected. So don't want to have that happen. So as Laura said, I'm going to speak about brave listening. And normally my area of specialization is helping people who have suicidal thoughts. And normally that's what I talk about. But today I'm going to go broader, because listening isn't only for people who have suicidal thoughts. Listening well is crucial for everybody and for all sorts of levels of issues and challenges that your kids may present with. So I'm going to start with an example, and I want you to imagine for a moment, those of you who are parents, which I suspect most are, Imagine your child or your teen comes to you and y'all, or maybe you're in the car, you're driving. I know with our own son, he would often say things that were rather profound while he was sitting in the back seat of the car and I was driving. So your child says, "I'm such a loser. I can't do anything right." And I want you to think for a moment of what your immediate instinctive response is to your child saying, "I'm such a loser. I can't do anything right." And so I've given you a few moments to think about it. Here are some things that when I do trainings like this come up. The instinctive responses that people share are, "You are not a loser. You do so many things well." Or, "You don't really mean that. You don't really think you're a loser." Other responses might be, "It hurts to hear you say that. Don't talk about yourself that way." Another response might be, "Don't be so hard on yourself. How could you possibly think you're a loser? You're not being rational." And so on and so on. There are all sorts of responses like that that we instinctively may want to make. And, just a few more: "Don't be silly," or "Things can't be as bad as they seem right now." And then there also may be some kind of judgy responses people might have, like, "You're being kind of melodramatic, aren't you?" The thing is if our child says something like, "I'm a loser, I can't do anything right," or anything that is hard to hear and hard to believe that they're saying that and that they think it and believe it. When that happens, our instincts go up to try to reassure, to try to fix it, to try to talk them out of what they've said, to try to get them to think more positively about themselves. And all of that is well-intentioned and understandable. And again, a word I've used several times, instinctive in many ways for a parent to do. And yet it's not truly listening. Listening requires opening up the conversation rather than shutting it down. And each of the responses I gave before can short circuit your child's disclosure of how they feel and what they think about themselves. And so I call it brave listening because it's scary. It hurts sometimes to hear someone you love in pain or struggling in some other way, and we instinctively want to make it better and to also make ourselves feel better, right? Because if they're not feeling that way, if we can talk them out of these negative thoughts they're having about themselves, then we feel better too. So I will get to what could be some brave listening responses to that. But first, I just want to say that one way I define brave listening is it's asking the questions whose answers you fear and listening to what's hard to hear. And of course, I mentioned that I specialize in helping people who have suicidal thoughts. So therefore, this is especially relevant, but it's relevant all across the board. Brave listening is resisting the temptation to make the person feel better right away, the temptation to give advice, to lecture, to offer reassurance, to convince the person to think or feel differently. Brave listening focuses on the person's needs, not on your own wish to feel less helpless, worried, and stressed as you listen. So I wonder, I'm delighted that people have access to the chat because in some webinar settings they don't. I wonder if people could put in the chat ideas for what would be brave listening responses to the statement. What was the statement I said? "I'm such a loser, I can't do anything right." These are lovely. Wonderful. So in the chat, there's just flowing in questions that open the door to the person saying more. Questions like, what has happened to make you feel this way? Or, oh, sweetheart, tell me more what's going on. It sounds like you're having a hard time. Can you tell me what happened? What do you mean when you say that? And all of these are questions that are rooted in curiosity and compassion rather than judgment and fear. You may feel fearful. There's a book that's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I riff on that and say, feel the fear and listen anyway. You may feel fearful hearing your child say negative, painful things about themselves, but it's important to respond to them with curiosity and compassion, and definitely empathy and validation. I saw empathy came up on the screen when I was looking at the chat. So most of these questions are a variation of tell me more, which is a wonderful invitation for somebody to tell you more about what they're thinking without feeling like they're burdening you or upsetting you or being judged. I'm not really having time to read all the responses because a lot came in, but I am seeing quite a few. And I'm also going to offer some of mine. And they may be repetitive because, like I said, I can't see everything that people have submitted. But some of the ones that I jotted down are, oof, those kinds of feelings are so painful. What's going on? Another possible response, if somebody says I'm a loser and I can't do anything right, could be, you're feeling really bad about yourself right now. Can you tell me more? Another could be, and this is one that I've seen a lot in the chat, what's happened to make you feel that way? What's happened to make you feel that you're a loser and you can't do anything right? And you might be so tempted to rebut them that it's hard to resist. And even if you can't resist, there's still a way to keep the conversation open. So an example of that would be, as your mother, I don't agree at all that you're a loser and that you can't do anything right. But I'd like to understand why you believe that, because I know it must be so painful to feel that way. Can you tell me more? So then that way you've registered your disagreement if you feel a compelling need to do so, but you've also left the door open. And that's the main thing, the main distinction between brave listening and then sort of what I would say is conventional instinctive responses, is that you're opening it up rather than shutting it down. And it's easier said than done, because people can have a lot of fears that make it hard to listen bravely. And some of these I go over in my book, Loving Someone with Suicidal Thoughts. So if you've read that, it might seem a little repetitive, but again, it applies in all sorts of situations. That some fears when our child or teen is telling us something very difficult to hear. We may have the fear that if I don't try to help my child feel better right away, they'll feel worse and it'll be my fault. I will have failed at helping them to feel better. We may have the fear that their feelings are contagious and we'll start feeling sad or anxious or stressed in the same way they are. We might fear that we're helpless and that if we don't jump in and try to fix things, then we're really exposed as being helpless. Sometimes I hear a fear, and this comes from the side of judgment. If I let them wallow in negativity, then I'll be encouraging a pity party. Another fear could be that my child will think I agree with them if I don't just immediately tell them that they're wrong for saying that about themselves. And all of these, are understandable and natural fears. And if you go in the direction of your fear rather than non-judgmental curiosity, then you risk really losing a precious opportunity to hear what's going on in your child's head and heart. Listening bravely doesn't require an advanced degree. I mean, certainly it's something that's taught in therapy programs. It's called active listening or reflective listening, empathic listening. But you don't need training as a therapist to be able to listen. There are books that one of the best books on this topic is How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. And it doesn't require even saying much. And that's one of the things I think is so important about brave listening is that how you listen is more important than what you say. And so often when we are trying to listen, we're trying to think of what we're going to say next. And we're trying to think of what is the right thing to say. And I'll put that in air quotes, the right thing, as if there is a single right thing to say. And often it's just being present and not allowing, because that makes it sound like you could forbid, but, enabling or encouraging, that's a better word, encouraging this conversation to continue is important. So let me see, I just got a Zoom notification on my screen that distracted me. So let me look at my notes and say that I was saying that you don't need advanced training in order to listen bravely. And it's actually rather astonishing at how easy and simple, not easy, but simple, uncomplicated it is to listen bravely. I did a training for a suicide hotline about, almost 30 years ago. And that's how I entered this world of listening well and listening bravely and working to help prevent suicide. I worked at a crisis hotline, and we underwent training, and almost all it was on reflecting what we heard people say, conveying empathy, and validating their feelings. And these three things, reflection, empathy, and validation, are so important and not very complicated. Because one of the ways that you can convey empathy is just to hug your child, or to nod and say, mm-hmm, or, oh, you're really hurting, or something that's not a complicated statement. I want to give another example. The one I gave is sort of a very heavy example of I'm a loser and I can't do anything right. This one may be a little more ambiguous on how you might respond. And this is an example of a mother and her 17-year-old son, Daniel. And she's coming home, and when she gets home from the store, she finds Daniel is pacing the living room back and forth. And he says to her, I screwed up. I really screwed up at work. And so she immediately gets tense because she expects him to say some sort of disaster happened at work, and she hates seeing him in distress and pain, and she's immediately, worried about what he's going to say. And so she says, what happened? And he says, I'm so stupid. I told my boss goodbye when I left after my shift ended. Can you believe that? I mean, now he thinks that I quit because I didn't say see you later or see you tomorrow. And his mother's immediate temptation was sort of to laugh at, sort of out of relief, and sort of because it was such, in her mind, an overreaction. He was hyper analyzing this one throwaway word, goodbye, as if it were literally true, and that he had meant that the two of them would never see each other again. But she held back her response because she knew that to her son, this was anything but funny. And if she told him, this is, you're being absurd, or this is so minor, or you're over worrying, or don't stress yourself out so much, she knew it wasn't likely that he would say, oh, okay, you're right, never mind, because he was very clearly worried. So instead of trying to talk him out of his feelings, she acknowledged them. And she said, you're really worried. And he nodded his head and he kept pacing. And she said, are you worried he'll read something bad into your saying goodbye and you don't want to jeopardize your job or upset him? And actually, I kind of already gave that part away. So you might think she's a really horrible listener because I already said that he said he was worried his boss would think he was never coming back. So forgive that inconsistency. But he's, now at this point, he says, yes, I'm scared he thinks that I quit and now I've lost my job. He's already hiring someone else to replace me. And even though his mother's thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's reacting this way, she says, I know how much this job means to you. And he says, right, I need the money for prom. And he keeps walking and he says, but maybe he doesn't think I quit. I don't know. What do you think? And now he's asked her for her opinion. And if she gives her opinion, she's not just shutting him down prematurely. She's gained an understanding of what he's thinking. And so now may be a time for him to say, well, since you asked, I think it's possible it didn't even occur to him. Like that people say goodbye so much, and it's just such a word we use so often that I think it's likely that he thought you meant see you until next time. And so this was an exchange where he was open to what she had to say because she had been open to what he had to say. She had conveyed openness to what he had to say, rather than saying it's not a big deal or you're over worrying or something like that. And there's not one right way to respond. And you may not agree with the way that my fictional character responded. There are other things that she could have done. She could have said, tell me what happened. She could have said, that sounds so stressful to be worried like that. She could have just given him a hug or done something else to help him feel connected, to feel seen and understood. And all of these provide validation. And validation is so important. And validation can confuse people because it's got the word valid in it. And it can seem like we're telling the person that what they're saying is valid and true. But in this context, validation means that their emotions are valid, not that the content of what they're worried about is true, but that it's understandable that they're worried, and that it's okay, and they're not going to be judged as silly or absurd or anything like that. And invalidating responses are completely built into our culture. One of the most invalidating, pervasive comments I've heard in the last few years is man up. So if a teenage boy or a younger boy, for example, starts crying or expresses sensitivity, emotional sensitivity about something, sometimes people around them may say, man up. And again, at the risk of my being judgy, I want to say that those kinds of statements come from good intentions. Often they come from a place of protectiveness, of not wanting their child to be hurt or judged by other people, but they also shut down the conversation. Because not only do they shut it down in that moment, but they can shut it down for the future, that the person is less likely to come to someone who has responded that way. And the problem may be much bigger in the future. And their parent may really want them to come to them for help. That's a gendered response that often happens to men or boys. And with girls and women, often they're told, don't be hysterical or calm down. Calm down, don't be hysterical. And those are extremely invalidating responses. You could always find something to validate, even if what they're saying is completely incomprehensible to you in content. There's always something to validate in the emotion. And that can be about how stressful it is what they're experiencing, or that you can see how worried they are, or you can see how upset they are. And what you're saying is, I see you, I accept you, and I'm trying to understand. And maybe even you are able to make sense of what they're saying. Reflection can involve just kind of repeating back, not in a parody way. And I sometimes say my T's as D's, so let me say that again, not in a parrot-T way, not where you're parroting the person, but where you're showing that you're hearing what they're saying. So I'm a bad person, I'm a loser, and I can't do anything right. One way to reflect that would be, you're really feeling like you haven't done anything right lately, aren't you? Or you're really not able to come up with anything that you've done right, or something along those lines. So you can reflect by paraphrasing, summarizing, just repeating back the last few words the person has said. And in this case, you're really encouraging the person to keep going. And other ways of encouraging people to keep going are called minimal encouragers in my grad school. And those include things like and and oh, different things that acknowledge you're listening, but you're not offering your opinion or even launching into anything on your own yet. And I think that may be I'm close to a stopping point because I know that there are a lot of questions. So I just want to say a couple other things and then I'll open it to questions. One thing I want to say is that brave listening doesn't really come naturally. That's why I kept using the word instinctively in the beginning of my talk, because instinctively we want people to feel better. We want to help them to feel better. And it hurts to see somebody hurt. It hurts us too. So we want to feel better. So it requires practice, honestly. It can feel stilted and uncomfortable, especially the first few times you really try to listen bravely without injecting your own opinion or needs or fears or those other things. And what I would encourage you to do is to think of it like a foreign language. Like you wouldn't just, hear a lecture on Spanish and then expect to be fluent in Spanish. You'd have to practice. You'd have to, keep at it. And it's inevitable you'll make mistakes. And, there's no perfection in this. Everyone is imperfect when it comes to listening. Even a psychotherapist with 50 years experience is flawed when it comes to listening. And so what is it? There's a phrase in 12 steps, progress, not perfection. Strive for progress, not perfection. And that's where I'm going to stop for now. So thank you for hearing me out and for listening bravely.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, all your comments. And it is harder to do than to describe. So we're going to just take a moment here so people can respond to the poll and tell us what publication you used for registering for the event. They really like that data. Boy, it just turned dark in here. So I'm going to turn on a light so that we don't look like it in the dark. Light doesn't work. Okay. So good. We're getting a lot of data there. As people respond, I thought we could get started by acknowledging that parents have a range of experiences trying to talk about feelings with their children, depending on their child's age, the temperament of the child, personality of the parents, personal histories like trauma, immigration, or other difficulties. So I thought what we do is we'd zoom out and just talk about children and mental health and building mental health, and then zoom back into specific problems that parents are addressing in the Zoom. So first, parents just want to know, how can I, let's talk about young children, like toddlers and up. How do I help my child learn to talk about their feelings, like a skill?
That's a great question. And that's, there's different possible responses. I think one way is to model it and to talk about your own feelings with the child, not in a way to burden them. Like, I can think of several examples where you could be sharing emotions as a way, that may not be the most healthy way. Like, they're going through my head and I don't want to say them aloud because it could sound bad, but I'm sure you can think of some examples too. But like, oh, I had a really bad day today. I'm so upset. I'm so upset. I went to the store and somebody bumped my car, and now it caused $2,000 worth of damage, and they didn't leave a note. And it really makes me mad, and just openly acknowledging and talking about emotions. And you might even say, like, sometimes when I'm mad, I feel it in my tummy. Do you ever feel it in your tummy when you're mad about something? And just really opening the door. So modeling is really considered one of the very best ways to teach children. So I would say just really trying to make it a point to let them in on your own emotional responses, and then asking questions that could encourage uh, them to give voice to what they're feeling. I mean, I know one thing is speak with your words. What is that? Speak with your words, not oh, it's a cliche, and I'm blanking out on it right now. But really encouraging them to name what they're thinking or feeling, and then also reflecting. Like, I'll just give you an example. Once I was in a session with a mother and her young baby and a toddler, and the toddler wasn't there for therapy. It was just that the mother didn't have somebody sitting, and so to sit with her. And the toddler kept distracting the mother, and like really wanted, there was a pen, and the toddler wanted to play with the pen, and the mother kept taking it away and saying, no, no. And then I tried my hand at modeling, and the toddler was crying, and I said to the toddler, oh, you really want that pen, don't you? And now she was kind of entranced, the toddler was. She looked at me and she nodded, and I said, it's so hard when you want something and then someone won't let you have it. That makes me really sad. Do you feel sad? And this was a really little toddler, so we weren't going to have like a long conversation about her emotions, but she stopped crying. Like, there was something about her being heard and acknowledged that felt validating to this little child.
One of the things I've done, Stacey, is ask parents to print out, go to Google and say list of positive emotions, list of negative emotions, and then put them on the refrigerator, or play a game that people use the different words just as like you said, it's learning a language, and we value this language. And at this table, people can do highs and lows at the table about the events of the day. Use some of these feelings, because there are more feelings than mad and sad and so forth. But when you see the feelings, you can list it, you can use them. But often people just don't have the vocabulary. And with all the emotional intelligence research, it starts with identifying feelings. So extending from children to teenagers, we know that developmentally it's more likely than not that they will keep things more private, and struggle with sharing that, especially with their parents. And one of the parents has a specific question I thought I'd share. I know my 15-year-old is struggling with friends, school, self-esteem, and confidence. He refuses to do after-school activities or sports. He absolutely refuses to talk to me or his father or a counselor. He says we need to leave him alone. He just wants to shut himself in his room and game. What should I do?
Oh, that's such a tough situation, because on the one hand, you want to honor the person's boundaries and wishes, and part of trauma-informed work, which is, and I don't know how much y'all have gone over trauma-informed things in previous seminars or webinars, but there's a lot of emphasis lately on trauma-informed teaching, trauma-informed therapy, trauma-informed listening, and one of the main tenets of trauma-informed anything is honoring the person's limits, and not pressing for information aggressively when they don't want to give it, because then that can feel traumatizing to them if they've been through a trauma. So on the one hand, you want to honor their limits and boundaries, but on the other hand, you don't want them to stay in their room for the next 10 years. And you may be scared and worried about their future. I mean, I know our son's 24, but I know for me as a parent, what often tripped me up was my fear about, what if this doesn't change? You know, like what if what he's doing now that's a problem he's still doing, and then I'd have to bring myself back into the present moment. So I think what's important there, and by the way, I don't know the exact right answer because there is no exact right answer that works for everybody. But I think what's important is trying to find the sweet spot.
Mhm.
You know, trying to.
How about an idea that, because people keep saying it's harder to do than describe. How about I'm a teenager, I'll be that 15-year-old and you be not this 15-year-old, let's make it more generic.
Okay.
You're my mom, I'm the 15-year-old, and we'll just start with the typical, I'll start. You want to do this? I think we should try to do it.
With the caveat that I'm not perfect, but yes.
I already like you kind of as a mom, so I'm ready to go. But I'm a 15-year-old, so don't get in my grill too much here. So let's say I start by, you come to my room and I say, Mom, would you just leave me alone?
Okay, I'm having flashbacks. Like I said, our son is
Me too.
24, but I'm definitely having flashbacks. Well, I mean, again, that's a literal door.
No, let's just do it. Let's do it. Mom, leave me alone.
Okay.
Yeah, that's mom.
Okay, so, you really don't want to talk right now.
Yeah, Mom, come on. You're always looking at me to like have these moments, and like, if you really care about how I feel, I want you to leave me alone.
Can we make a deal?
What now?
I'll leave you alone now, but we'll have a check-in later tonight or tomorrow.
That's what you said last week, and here you are again. Mom, my life is stressful enough. You're stressing me out. Just even looking at you, looking so concerned about me, that stresses me out.
So I'm worried that you're stressed, and then what you're telling me is my worry is making you more stressed.
Exactly. My whole life is stress, as if you don't know that. I mean, ninth grade, you said it was going to get better. It's not better. It's horrible. That's why I just need to veg out here.
Kind of like decompressing, right?
Yeah. I mean, ninth grade, it's like my version of hell.
Huh, I remember that. Wasn't that long ago, but I remember. Okay, well, I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying, that my asking you is stressing you out when I'm asking you how you're feeling or what's going on. And I also don't want to be completely shut out. So what do you think we could do that would allow you to decompress?
Well, how about you get rid of all my stressors at school? I mean, I'm in ninth grade. I'm not perfect like my older brother. You're always concerned about me because you don't have to be concerned about him. He's perfect. I mean, as if I don't know that, Mom. I'm disappointing everybody. Look at your face. I'm disappointing you and you know it.
Well, if you see anything on my face, it's that I feel sad that you feel that you're disappointing me.
Yeah, well, I'm not perfect like Jeremy. Like, it's obvious, right? Everything comes easy to him.
And again, in case you see something on my face, that sounds so painful to feel that way, to feel that you're a disappointment and your brother is perfect.
Yeah, as if he's not. He is. He took biology and it was like a walk in the park. I think we can, what we're trying to do here is just get them to complain if possible.
Yes.
Right, Stacey? Part of it
And
is
not tell them
picking
that they're wrong.
Right. Well, for sure. And, you were not getting defensive. You weren't saying, look, I'm just here to help. I can just list everything you did right, because I think what we're not saying is sometimes we're here to listen, but they turn on the parent because we're low hanging fruit. We're sitting there, we're irritating them with our expectations of what we want. And the teachers, the peers, the girls that they wish liked them but don't because they're not winners like Jeremy, whatever. They're not, those dragons aren't here, but Mom's here. And so what part of it is that we need to be dumped on and okay with that and keep going like you did, right? That's so hard. I so appreciate the way you just hung in while I was just flinging everything I could at you, even loving Jeremy more than me. You didn't go for that either. No, I don't. I love you equally. It's so easy to go down that road, to say, no, I don't love that. And I always think that when there's an easy kid and a hard kid, the hard kid is just going to always focus on, you like him better. So you were doing everything right, and it did look easy probably to the viewers, but it's not when it's being thrown in your face. So I want to just emphasize that. Okay,
Let me just say how much I wish I had been that well prepared when I did knock on my son's door and he did say, go away.
How many times did that happen with me, with my 15-year-old son? Absolutely. And my 15-year-old daughter, who is even more like that than my son, because there's sometimes gender differences. My daughter was way more, cold shoulder than my son. So, temperament can sometimes matter more than gender. I feel compelled to go on to all these questions, but I'm going to get into a lot of specific questions, Stacey, but this first one we always get asked, given the cold shoulder that you're going to get from teenagers, how do we differentiate between typical teen mood swings and more serious mental health concerns? And I would add that with all the stats about, 1 out of 5 kids feels sad and hopeless and sometimes, overwhelmed with stress, that sometimes we're normalizing stress so much that parents really are having a tougher time knowing what's normal teenage angst and despair, and when should I worry about it more?
It's so hard because on the one hand, oops, my earbuds came out. On the one hand, adolescence is a time where teens are, achieving more independence. They're separating from their parents. Their friends, their peers tend to be more important than parents at this point in their minds. And so that's normal. That's part of development. But on the other hand, adolescence is also a time when mental illness first emerges. And the rates of depression go up exponentially with puberty, so, and we don't quite know why, but they do. And so holding those two things at once is hard. Like, okay, this is normal developmentally, and this could be a sign that something's wrong. So I think, just off the top of my head, what I would say is how pervasive is the issue. If your child is giving you the cold shoulder because, they want to keep things to themselves, that's different than they're giving you the cold shoulder and they're never coming out of their room, and they're no longer hanging out with their friends, and they're not they're not doing the things that used to interest them a lot. So the latter would have me worried about depression, because it's more of a pervasive pattern than one isolated thing. But even then, it could be that there's more than one thing, but it's not completely pervasive. And it's something to be on the lookout for are there a wide range of symptoms?
Yeah. Let's get into some specifics here. One person was associating her daughter's perfectionism with her depressive tendencies, which absolutely are correlated. And I'm sure we have other listeners that have that dilemma. How do you work on the problem of perfectionism with your child?
Oh, it's so hard, because so often our kids have much higher standards for themselves than we ever would, but they think that their standards are what our standards are. And I think, one of the most instrumental things I've seen, both in my own personal work and in work with clients, is really working on self-compassion and really talking about the imperfections that are inherent in the human condition. Earlier I talked about modeling emotion and also modeling mistakes, and that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to try for something and to not achieve it and not be perfect at it. And then if you're observing perfectionism in your child, being curious about that and asking, like, do you hold everybody to that standard, or is it just you? Like, if your best friend came to you and said to you, oh my God, I made a 98 on the test, I'm a failure because I didn't make 100. Do you say to her that she's a failure? Because that's what you say to yourself. And really just being very explicit about the kindness we show to others that we don't show to ourselves.
Yeah, I think that we do that work and compassion work, right? Like, how would you talk to a friend? And now how would you like to now talk to yourself? Also, when we do therapy with this population, we actually have as assignments, make mistakes and living with it. Go into the pizza and a restaurant and ask them for, some egg rolls. Right? Or go to, just so they can experience that overwhelm of imperfect and learn to face it and ride the wave of anxiety, because they really need training in being imperfect. It's really harder than it looks. Okay, another question.
Can I say something real fast?
Sure.
I think good enough is really important. I mean, I know the phrase good enough can have pejorative meanings, like where someone's like, well, I'm just going to do a good enough job and slack off the rest of the day, but for people who are perfectionists, good enough can be life-changing for them to really recognize that I can do a good enough job. And I'm just going to say one more thing, which is I used to be a journalist, and I would get really anxious when I had to write an article, like, oh my God, this article is going to be terrible. What do I do? And finally, one day I said to myself, okay, I'm writing about 250 newspaper articles a year. And by definition, 10% of them aren't going to be good. Let's be generous and say 90% of them are good and 10% aren't. So that means 25 aren't going to be good. This can be one of those 25. And that freed me up.
Good one. Here's a mom that says she has 4 kids between the ages of 6 and 21, and the father's incarcerated, and each one of the children are showing very strong stress reactions to that. And she says, how do I deal with all 4 kids having so much stress and the notion that it's going to be constant stress?
Well, I mean, I don't mean to be glib when I say this, but I really hope that you, mom, wherever you are getting help, and that your kids are getting help, and that you're not alone with this. And that help might be from a therapist, it might be from a school counselor, it might be from a minister, it might be from a support group. I know that in some places there are support groups for children who have a parent who's incarcerated, and support groups for spouses of incarcerated people. So if there's something like that available. So the first thing I would say is really just to, as much as you can, to try to get help, which you may already be doing, The other thing would be to, let me think. Definitely, I would want to convey, that there's an open invitation to talk about the stress and one's feelings, and also to just try to have fun together sometimes, and to not forget the little things. And I mean, I know, like with some parents, things can get so stressful that they forget that just tickling their children can, I mean, obviously you're not going to tickle your 17-year-old, but tickling your 7-year-old, or, doing something playful like that can provide a lot of relief in that moment.
Our next speaker will be on play, Stacey. And I love that phrase, that play is the opposite of worry. And when I talk about that from a neuroscience point of view, I want to make it more profound, that truly when you're playful and curious and seeking joy, you are activating circuits in a different part of your brain than worry. It's incompatible with worry. It means you're freed up. So it's great. We'll put that on the prescription pad for everybody that's listening today, because who doesn't need to be less stressed, have more fun? The next one is a parent of an autistic child, of course, pointing out that they have a more difficult time identifying feelings. So what special tips do you have for parents of autistic children or neurodiverse children?
I would say autistic, but also any child who has difficulty identifying feelings. You alluded to this, but I'm going to put a label to this, and that's feeling charts. You can go online, and there's all sorts of feelings charts that you can print out and, like you said, post on the fridge. And so asking somebody to look at the chart and saying, which of these fits you right now? And it's not only the words, it's also the expressions, these feelings charts. you know, and so that might be easier for a child who isn't um what's the neurotypical? I was trying to think of the word. For a child who isn't neurotypical, it might be easier for them to look at images and relate to images and to not have to use words. Another thing that I've seen be useful is telling a story and asking the child, what do you think is going on with, you know, like telling a story about someone who got in trouble at school and now they're in their room and I mean, you know, you don't want to be completely obvious that that the story is a corollary for your own child, but kids can express more in play and story a lot than they can about their own situation. And so telling a story, and even in, like, I know in cognitive behavior therapy with kids, sometimes they'll use like a cartoon with a blank bubble, and they'll say, what do you think the person is thinking right now, or what do you think the person is feeling? So, you know, being creative about as an adult, you know, it's much easier to just be able to say to somebody, what are you thinking right now? Or, you know, what are you feeling right now? But sometimes we have to you know, if an emotion were a color, what color would you be right now? You know, I mean, sometimes we need to think outside the box.
That's helpful. Here's a question from a parent who has a suicidal child, and she has turned down advice to use medication, and she wants to know what you think about whether you think medications can prevent suicide.
That's a tricky question. Not tricky question, but tricky answer. Because on the one hand, there is definitely evidence that medication can help people, especially people with more severe cases of depression. Like mild and moderate depression, there's not as big of an effect, and in fact, there may be no effect but from antidepressants. But when we get into the more serious or severe cases of depression, there's definitely evidence of effectiveness. And there's also evidence that they can activate suicidal thoughts in some people, or worsen suicidal thoughts in some people, particularly young people. The percentage of people who are affected negatively that way is very small.
Right.
You know, according to the research that we have right now. And it's generally, I can't say universally, but it's generally agreed on in the mental health field that the danger of not medicating somebody with suicidal depression is bigger than the danger of medicating them.
Yeah.
And if they do take medication, it needs to be monitored, you know, and both the parents and the child or teen need to be aware that if there's a change in their thinking or in their feelings or mood, you know, that could be because of the medication, and the doctor who prescribed, or the nurse, or, you know, physician's assistant, or whoever who prescribed needs to be informed.
Okay. There's a question from one parent that says she's concerned about internalized racism, and she's raising her biracial child. And she says, what can I do to make sure my child is emotionally healthy?
That is a really good question, and a very relevant question these days with the political climate and different things in our country. I'm thinking. I have to say that as somebody who is white and our son is white, I haven't really had to encounter this firsthand, but thinking clinically, and of the things that I'm aware of that can help other people, is being sure to infuse your world with people who are positive role models, people who can be a living testimony of hope and potential, and being open at the same time to what the child may say that's negative about themselves. You know, and that if they have internalized racism and they start saying things that are negative about themselves, again, not immediately shutting them down with how could you say that, or that's so wrong, or people who feel that way about you are wrong, but really trying to hear out the child about what they have come to believe or internalize, and responding with empathy. And I talked about validation before. Of course, you're not going to validate, yes, these negative feelings you have about yourself based on your race are true. I mean, of course, that's not the case. But you can validate how in our society, where we get so many mixed messages about race, that it makes sense that you would have conflicting feelings about your race, and by that I mean, on the one hand, we're told we're a melting pot and we're colorblind, and then on the other hand, and when I say we, I mean American society, and then on the other hand, we're told that we know that that's not true, and that can even be dismissive and minimizing the people who aren't in the dominant majority. And so when you're getting all these different messages, then it's going to create conflicting emotions and thoughts.
Here's a very interesting question. I know my 13-year-old would feel better mentally if she had friends, reached out to others, and participated in school activities. Would it be okay to pay her to do these things?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. I mean, that's going to probably depend on parenting style and preference. I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule, but I think the more we can tap into somebody's intrinsic desire to do something, then the better it is. And sometimes that desire can be encouraged with rewards. But I wonder if there's a reward that would be less transactional than money. Like if there's a reward that if you put yourself out there and you try this, for at least one time, and you try it with an open mind, or maybe even 2 times, then we can go to the amusement park that you like. Or, if you ask a friend, if you spend time with your friend and you like them, then I will take you to the amusement park together with the friend.
Or to the hockey game, or whatever you would find. Exactly. We just got a hockey team in Seattle, so it's all about hockey these days, as if it's not about football. That would be last weekend. Okay. Anyway, there will be some resources that Stacey has recommended. So a lot of people want to know about resources. So Brenna will put those in the page associated with the event. But a lot of people have asked about, how do you find a good counselor?
That's a good question, because there's still stigma about mental health treatment, unfortunately. And so what that means is a lot of people with really good therapists don't talk about it.
Right.
It's not like a mechanic where people freely give out the name and information. So I would say asking around, if you feel comfortable doing that. Word of mouth can be very valuable, especially like if you have a friend who you like and respect, and if they like their therapist and recommend them, then it's likely that you may be on the same wavelength. There's a database on Psychology Today of therapists, and you can go onto that database to find therapists based on what they specialize in. Like, for example, the mother who asked the question, or the parent who asked the question about the biracial child, there are some therapists on Psychology Today or on other on other sites like that may specialize in helping people who are biracial, or in helping people who are dealing with racial oppression, or other aspects of the societal structure in the United States. So websites like that. Also, if you have insurance, you can call your insurance company and find out who's covered. And then the other thing is, I would really encourage you, if you do get the name of a therapist, to look at their website, because almost, I can't say all therapists have websites, but most therapists these days have a website. And then you can learn much more about their approach or their specialization. And then a lot of therapists offer either the first session free or a consultation by phone for no charge. Like for example, me, and I'm not asking for clients here, but just for information, I will talk with someone for like 15 to 20 minutes on an introductory basis by phone so that they can ask me questions and know whether they want to make that first appointment.
Stacey, we have to close up, and I'm going to have a few comments at the end. But one of the things in listening to so much of your wisdom online, you've talked about is it sort of comes down to hang in there. Many people that have children with emotional difficulties or suicidal thinking, it won't end quickly. And you have so much good thinking about how to stay hopeful and stay in there and have the stamina for the long haul. So we just say a little bit about that, and then I'll close out.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important is this moment, even though we are encouraged to be mindful, and to stay in the present moment, I think it's also important to recognize that what you do in this moment may bear fruit later. So by inviting your child to talk about what they're feeling, by showing empathy, by listening, and by respecting their limits, you're also planting seeds for the future when they may then feel more comfortable coming to you and talking to you about things. So I think it's important to recognize that we're constantly dropping seeds and we don't know which are going to grow and bloom where and when. And that as hard as things can be, they're also constantly changing. And so when things feel very hopeless or desperate, in Texas where I grew up, they said if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes. And with children, often time can produce dramatic change. And if not, then please, I hope people will get support.
Well, thank you so much, Stacey, for everything you contributed today. We're very appreciative. And thank you to our media partners. Thank you to our listeners, viewers. If you haven't signed up for the rest of the Parent Ed Talks, you can do so. There's still time to register. And we hope you join us for the next one, which is called Nurturing the Healing Power of Play for Ourselves and for Our Children on January 23rd. So with that, I'll say goodbye. Thanks again, Stacey, and to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.